Okay, so I'm going to start out. I call this my pretty picture speech because I just show pictures of boots and talk about them, and I don't really have a lot of plan. So I'm depending on all of you to help me with this presentation. I love being interrupted with questions, so if I don't explain something clearly enough, just raise your hand, wave it around, interrupt me, and we'll have questions. As she said, I was raised in a conservative little church. So if there's one image that just describes my whole story, it would be this one. My mom started teaching me to sew at age 12. And I remember the very first thing she said to me, she set me down at the sewing machine and she touched the tension post and she said, "This is the tension. Don't ever touch it." And that was pretty much the extent of the instruction. And by the time I was 14, she was coming to me for sewing tips. It just made sense. I love sewing. I love patterning. I love thinking about how things are shaped and how you can achieve a shape with fabric or leather. So this is lovely young teenage Lisa in a bridesmaid's dress I made to wear on my cousin's wedding. And this is the actual ad that I found in the newspaper. I'm originally from Missouri. My husband and I married and moved to Guthrie, Oklahoma. We were both from Missouri. And after 6 months in a 3-room apartment, I had left my sewing business behind. And after 6 months in a 3-room apartment, I got bored. And I answered an ad in the paper for stitching boot tops. This very ad, I looked it up on microfiche in the library in Guthrie. I had no idea what that meant. I'd never stitched on leather. I'd never worn cowboy boots. I did not know that real people could make footwear, but it sounded like sewing. So I called the ad, and Jay cussed at me a little bit and told me that sewing leather was nothing like sewing fabric, and he was correct. And he hired me. I wish I had included a picture of my very first, I still have the first piece of leather that I sewed on to apply for the job, and it is terrible. There are lots of corners in my curves. But Jay was an interesting dude. He was an alcoholic, and he cussed a lot, and I'd never been around anyone who smoked or who drank or cussed, and I used to go hide in the bathroom and cry. Okay, I'm going to walk you through the process of making a pair of boots, and this is a pair of boots that was commissioned by the Oklahoma Arts Council. These are Oklahoma-themed boots. They are now on permanent display in the Oklahoma State Capitol. If you get a chance to go see them, they are on the ground floor on the west side. They're really cool. This explanation will show you how cowboy boots go together, but where I kind of messed up here is this is a one-piece top, and a typical cowboy boot construction is a 4-piece construction. So usually what you have is a front panel, a back panel, and a side seam. So this one is a one-piece top, and the seam is up the back. And that's what makes this one different. The reason I did that is because I have all of these large design elements, as you can see. And when you have a 4-piece construction, with that front panel, you've got a tongue that comes up and a scallop that comes down, and this leaves you with kind of an H shape for design. That's not good when you have a large thing that you need to put in the middle. There's no room for it. So that's why I switched to a one-piece top, and that way I've got room for that Capitol building or the big flag. Otherwise, I would have had to make it smaller, put it right in the center of that H, and then I would have had all this empty space around. So that was my design sketch. This is the actual pattern. And if you follow me for any length of time, you will know that I'm absolutely obsessed with patterning. I love making patterns. If you spend the time on the patterns, your whole design just goes together. All right, so here I am. These are the wing tips. So decorative piece over the toe is called a wing tip. And this is a very decorative piece. All of these are Oklahoma things. I've probably forgotten some of them by now. But we have an Indian blanket flower and a mountain boomer that is the official state reptile, I think. And then the 46 is the original Oklahoma flag because Oklahoma was the 46th state. And there we go. There's the finished wingtip sewn onto the foot part of a boot. It's called the vamp. So there's the wingtip sewn onto the vamp. These are top bands. So these will go on the very top part of the boot, and they have little Oklahoma. Again, there are so many Oklahoma things, like mistletoe is the state, I don't know, parasite. There's so many little, I think the frog is the reptile. I don't know. I looked it up at the time to make sure it's accurate, but I can't remember. And but you can see from all these tiny little pieces, the white ones are my pattern pieces. The reason I like to cut pattern pieces for every single thing is, if you will notice, these two top bands are reversed. There's a right and a left. They're mirror images. So if I cut pattern pieces and I cut everything accurately, then I can take my pattern piece and cut one this way and one this way, and I know everything is accurate. When you look at this boot or anything else that I'm talking about, you will notice different colors. Every color you see is a different piece of leather. There's no painting. And now all of the pieces are together and they have been stitched. I'll talk more about this later, but stitching is the thing that ties it all together. Stitching is so important. This is the Capitol building. And remember I showed you that big piece of leather because it's a one-piece top? Well, that piece of leather is about this wide, and the throat of my sewing machine is about this wide. So stitching, putting this in and hauling that through the throat of my sewing machine would have been a pain as I'm going up and down for this building. So I'd never really done this before. I stitched this piece and then inlaid it in. So I had to be incredibly accurate to make sure that it was stitched properly, and I cut out the right size and shape of hole to put it in. But this way I was able to stitch the building details on a piece of leather this big and not this big. And this is amazing because it's only just stitching and it's only just straight lines, but it became the Capitol building. Or at least I hope you recognize it as the Oklahoma Capitol building. It's pretty small. It's only this big. So getting detail is a challenge sometimes. Yes? Oh, I haven't added the Guardian yet. He will come in a minute, and he's only like 5 stitches. So it's hilarious how your eye fills it in and thinks it's a Guardian when really it's just a stitch. This is the Oklahoma State flag, which is inlaid into the boots. And since I was working on these boots for the Capitol and they hadn't been presented yet, I couldn't share photos on Facebook or on social media. But I did share a picture of the Oklahoma State flag of this because, that's not a secret. And my sister, I posted the picture of the Oklahoma flag and my sister immediately commented, "Why did you misspell Oklahoma?" And I just about had a heart attack because I live in fear of misspelling something in stitching. Once you stitch something, you have a hole. It's not like fabric where you can rip it out and start over. She scared me so bad. And this little shield, that little shield is this big. So you can see the level of detail I've got there with teeny tiny stitches and teeny tiny pieces of leather. This is a close-up of my patterns. So I talked about inlay, that the Capitol building was inlay, which means I cut a piece of white and I did some stitching on it and I put it behind. This bird is going to be overlay. So I cut out the bird-shaped pieces. You can see his wing and his head and his tail, and I put them all together, and then I lay those on top. So that's overlay. Sure.
I'm looking at that. What? No, go back. Yeah. So are these holes that I'm seeing in there?
In the white poster board?
Is that white poster?
Yeah, the white poster board is my pattern.
Oh, okay. It's not the actual.
No, it's not the leather. It's my pattern piece, and I stitched the holes on the machine with no thread in the needle, and that punches little holes, and then I can lay that piece of poster board on a piece of leather and I rub over it with a baby sock filled with baby powder, and then the powder falls through the holes, and that leaves a little line of dots that shows me where to cut or to stitch. We'd have to count. I don't know. I never count, but I'm guessing 6 or 8. A lot of that, it's so tiny that a lot of it is just, where am I? There we go. A lot of it is just done with stitching, like the little crosses. That's just 4 stitches. So here's the completed boot top. It's all inlaid, it's all stitched, and look on the top of the Capitol building, and there's the little guardian. He's only, I think, 5 or 6 stitches. So it's totally your brain telling you he's the guardian. I would like to point out my genius. Look at the Oklahoma. It's got 2 stars. Because I'm from Guthrie, and Guthrie was the first capital of Oklahoma. And it was the capital for 3 years once Oklahoma became a state. So I put a little star for Guthrie in there, as well as Oklahoma City. Thank you. I thought it was. I was the bootmaker. I made that decision. Okay, so now we've got the wingtip and the counter tip. So the heel area of a boot or shoe, you want to hold your heel in place and not let it slide around. And so there's a hard piece around the heel of most footwear has a stiffer area around the heel, and that's called the counter. And then the counter cover is the leather piece that hides it and goes over it. So what you're looking at now is a vamp with a wingtip and the counter cover. And the counter cover also has a counter tip on it, that decorative piece with the music notes on it. So when I was making these boots, I wanted to give a nod to the fact that Oklahoma was originally Indian territory. There were lots of tribes moved here. And I wanted to reference that. And I also wanted to reference the fact that Oklahoma, there were originally dreams of Oklahoma becoming an all-black state. But it's hard to put all these stories onto a pair of boots. And the only way I was able to reference that the music is the first line to Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, which was written by an enslaved Oklahoma man named Wallace Willis. And it's cool that he was credited for it. Now I'm starting to put the boots together. So I'm sewing the vamp onto the boot tops. And now I have the hard counter in. This point right here is where it becomes so hard to make this style of boot. A one-piece boot top is a very advanced construction. It is incredibly difficult, and this right here is why. You will notice the oil derrick. So Oklahoma is the only Capitol building that sits on a working oil well. And when you have a one-piece boot, you end up with a seam in the back. And a lot of times, if you notice the state boots, when you see the cowboy boot exhibit, they've got just a strap over the side seam. You have to cover that seam with something. I don't like to just cover it with a strap, because then it's like a neon sign that says, hey, there's a seam under here. I like to cover it with something that becomes part of the design. So I put a working oil derrick over the back seam and made that back strap actually a design. And now they're finally all together, and I can relax a little bit, right? You'll see, I relaxed a little early. All right, so now I have them on the last. The last is a wood or plastic form that boots or shoes are built around. The last is not foot-shaped, it's shoe-shaped, but it's designed to accommodate a foot. So a last has a predetermined heel height. If I make you a pair of boots and you love them and they have a 2-inch heel, and then you come back and you say, these are great, and now I want to order another pair with a 1-inch heel, we have to start over. The last, it has a certain heel height, and it's sized, 10A or 8B or whatever. And I actually made these boots in my husband's size because they'll never be worn. And don't tell anyone, but I have one picture of him wearing these boots. And his will be the only foot probably that ever goes in them. So now they're on the last. This is great. Except the day I lasted these, I put them on the last and I set the boot down and I heard thunk, and I turned around and the boot had fallen off, and you see it has a really square, sharp corner on the toe. Fell, of course, right on that corner, busted the toe open, and I didn't know if I had any more of the chocolate brown leather. I was just sick. Like, I was ready to just lay on the floor and cry. And I went to dig in my scrap bin, and I had one piece of brown leather exactly big enough to make one wingtip. So now the pressure was really on because I can't screw up again. So that was like 10 a.m. I spent the rest of the day picking the stitches off to take the wingtip off and then making a whole new wingtip with the little 46 star and another mountain boomer and another Indian blanket. And then I had to sew it back on, except now it's off the last, obviously, but now the whole boot top is on. So I'm trying to wrestle it through the machine around all these curves, and I've got to carefully position it to where so that it covers up the previous holes and matches exactly. And I finished, I think, at 5:30, back to where I had been at 10. And then I just went home and sat on the couch for a while. I had to make a whole new, I had to make a whole new wingtip. I had to take one of these off. I had to take one off and make another one and then sew it back on, except now it's not on a small piece of leather, it's on a whole boot that I'm dragging through the machine. Of course, all the decorative stuff is done first. The only part that I'm sewing now is around that off-white band. It still was very stressful. Okay, so now at this point, every time I set them down, I'm like, but they didn't fall off again. And I was so happy the day I delivered them to the Oklahoma State Capitol. I set them on the table, and I was like, they're your problem now. If they fall off, it's not on me. They have been delivered. So here they are. This process is called inseaming. So when you're wearing a pair of cowboy boots and you look down and you see stitching going around the toe, that stitching is not on the top of the sole. I sew a narrow strip of leather called the welt, and that welt is hand-stitched through the boot and through the insole. And it's a hand stitch, and you pull it like this, and so it gives you really big shoulders and forearms. I've kind of lost mine because I don't make boots full-time anymore, but it will give you nice shoulders. So you can see the welt is sewn on the right, and then the one on the left, you can see the bottom of what it looks like. What I do is I sew the welt on, and then I lace the boot itself through the insole to hold everything tightly together. And then the strings are still hanging, and then I put in the steel shank. So this is what beeps when you go through the airport if you're wearing custom footwear, is that steel shank. And the steel shank is what holds the heel. So if you don't have a steel shank in there or something hard, if you were wearing heeled footwear, when you put your weight on it, it would just go and go flat. So you have to have something to hold that shape in place. So now I've laced the shank in. And I just think this is the prettiest part of the whole process. I'm always taking pictures of it because next I'm going to cover it up and it will never be seen again. So here's the shank cover. A cowboy boot has a very rounded area under the arch, and the shank cover is made from the same leather as the sole. So it's very heavy and thick in the middle, so I can get that nice rounded shape. And now I've put the sole on. So cowboy boots are traditionally pegged with little wooden pegs. This is a double row of pegs. If you've ever heard the expression, a square peg in a round hole, that's not a bad thing. A square peg in a round hole is exactly what you want to be, because when you put a square peg in a round hole, the tension created holds that peg tightly in place. So the square peg is slightly larger than the round hole, and you drive it in, and then it just holds tightly in place. And there's probably, 200 wood pegs there. I have an awl. So the awl is actually oval. It's not exactly round. And so I have a handle with a pegging awl in it, and I drive the hole, and it pops back out. It's got a little piece of rubber at the base of the awl. So I hit it, and it's almost like one motion. It goes all the way in, it bounces back out. And now I have a hole, and then I put the little wood peg in that hole, and I tap it to get it seated, and then I go whack. So you don't get two chances with wood pegs. It goes all the way in, or it breaks. And I love when I have visitors to my shop when I'm at this stage, because back in the heel, it's going to get covered up. It doesn't matter, especially when I have men and they're like, ooh, I could do that. And so I punch them a couple of holes and give them some wood pegs. Once in a while, someone surprises me, but usually they go tap, 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 break. Yes? It depends on the peg. So these are 6'11" pegs. Let me tell you how pegs are sized. So these pegs are 6'11". What that means is they are 6/8 of an inch long, not 3/4, 6/8. And then the 11th refers to the square. So they're 1/11 by 1/11 by 1/11 by 1/11 square. So 7/9 pegs would be 7/8 of an inch long, 1/9 by 1/9 by 1/9 by 1/9. It's such an odd sizing system. But these are 3/4 of an inch long.
So there's a supplier?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so here's the story on wood pegs. Let me make sure I'm on time here. Here's the story on wood pegs. So there were three in the 1850s and 60s. There were so many peg companies and so many shoe pegs that grain companies would put wood pegs in their grain to make so they could sell you less grain, but the weight was right. That's how many pegs there were. Fast forward to 2015, and there are 3 peg companies left in the entire world. One is in the US. It is making pegs using leftover Civil War equipment, and 2 are in Europe. That's it. During the pandemic, all 3 of them stopped making wood pegs. So wood pegs are like the smallest part of their business. What they do is they make tumbling media for denim. Now think about how many people in this world wear denim versus how many people in this world, factories included, that use wood shoe pegs. We don't count. So after the pandemic, the one in the US said, our machines are too old now. We can't go back to making wood pegs. So now we've got 2 in Europe, and they're no longer making wood pegs. And 1 was not interested. And 2, I sent them begging emails for months, and they ignored me. But I have a shoemaker friend in Germany. So I contacted Hartmut, and I said, please, can you help me? And Hartmut made this special liqueur that's really caramelly and buttery. It's so good. And he went to the factory with his homemade liqueur and said, please, will you make wood pegs again? And they agreed. So now we have 1 company in the entire world. Like if you see Lucchese making boots with wood pegs, they're coming from that company. That's all we have left. If the owner decides he doesn't care anymore, or if he dies and his children stop the factory, we're done. Cowboy boots are traditionally pegged with wood pegs, and that's our only source. It's really terrifying. Excuse me? 1850s, 60s, yeah. If they stop making them, either we find another style of construction, but they won't be traditional and they won't be as good, or we have to make, every time I make boots, I have to make 300 pegs. And those will be our only options. No one's going to start a company making wood shoe pegs because there's all of us. It's not a big enough market. I've seen an illustration describing how to make them, and actually if you read Little Farmer Boy by Laura Ingalls Wilder, there is a description of the itinerant cobbler coming around and working on their shoes and making shoes for them, and there's a description of him making wood pegs. So I could probably figure it out, but I don't want to. They're in Germany. Yeah. So okay, so wood pegs are used. Remember I talked about the shank and how it supports the arch area. So a cowboy is going to be putting weight there, and the wood pegs help make that area stiff and not flexible in a way that you can stitch that area, but it's a slightly bit more flexible than it is if it's pegged. That also supports that area of the sole. And the benefit of pegs over nails is that when you sweat, the moisture is going to make those pegs swell and hold tighter. Whereas if you use brass nails don't rust technically, but they do something. If you tear apart a pair of boots that have been nailed with brass nails, after a few years they just sort of turn black, and the insole around it turns black, and it just crumbles to dust. Pegs are the best. So here I am, I've got the boots together, and I'm building the heels. The heels are built 1 layer at a time from the same leather as the sole. So I put 1 layer on, and I level it, and I put another layer on, and I level it until I get to the proper heel height. And then I finish off with the rubber heel cap. And here's the completed boots that you can visit in the state capitol. Yeah, thank you. I'm pretty proud of them. So if you go to the Cowboy Boot exhibit, you'll see when you first walk in the door, there's the state boots. In the late 1940s, Lou Casey was commissioned to make a pair of boots for every state. At the time, there were only 48 states. I believe there are only 19 boots left, and there are 6 or 7 in the exhibit here. They are the finest, most perfect pair of boots you will ever see. They're so wonderful. And so I tried to model my boots after those because they're just so wonderful. And there's a close-up of the toe. I call it just a narrow square. Bootmakers have different names for different toes, and I only know what my tradition calls it. Okay, so yeah. I talked earlier about stitching. Stitching is so important, and in my shop, it is done one row at a time on an old Singer sewing machine from 1940s. I still have the original clutch motor on it, and we get along okay. So here I am sewing a top on my old Singer sewing machine. Oh, I did include it. This is the piece of leather that I applied for my job with. You can see corners in my curves, which is not correct. I'm so glad I saved it. I can't believe I had the foresight to save it. I can't believe Jay hired me.
Where is Jay now? How long?
Jay died in 1995. Yeah, he was an interesting dude. I'm so glad I had the opportunity to meet him. His shop was in Guthrie, right across from where Ray Dorwat's shop is now. The little one-story yellow building was where I worked. People often say to me, "You're good with color and design because you're a woman." And I tell them everything I know about color and design I learned from a grumpy old alcoholic man. So I want to talk a little bit about stitching. It's one of my favorite topics other than patterning. So if you look at these, we've got 2 overlaid squares and 2 inlay squares. They're exactly alike. So I've got to cut 2 squares of pink leather and put them on top, and I've cut out 2 squares out of the brown and put pink leather behind. That's the difference between overlay and inlay. Now look what happens when I'm stitching, how the stitching changes it. So on the far left, we've got the overlaid squares. I stitched that on with brown, and now visually your eye is drawn in, and that square has gotten smaller to you. When I stitch it with pink, then your eye is not distracted by the thread color and it stays the same size. Same with the inlaid squares. If I stitch around on the chocolate with chocolate thread, you still see the pink square. But if I stitch around it with pink on the brown, your eye is drawn outward and your square gets bigger. So you're always thinking about what stitching is going to do to your design. Here's another thing that you can do with stitching. Okay, it's very hard to convey any sense of light, shadow, or movement with stitching. Here's a little cowgirl. Imagine her before I stitched her. Her red shirt, she was just flat. She had no shape at all. But when I stitch in a plaid, suddenly she's got curves. And here's the completed pillow. So it's an optical illusion that she has curves. Here's another cool example of stitching. Okay, this is an overlaid design, and notice how your eye just hits it. It's got nowhere to go. It's very flat. I've added the colors, and it's still just flat. Nothing exciting about this. And suddenly I put the stitching on, and it's got movement. Your eye has places to go. And here's a similar completed pair of boots. This one's tough because anytime you put something on the side seam, they have to match. You want your 2 halves of the flower to look like this and not that.
So how long does it typically take to make like you just showed?
There's about 60 hours of work in an average boot. It depends on how complex they are and how fast I am. The pair. Yes, I'm always talking about pairs. Okay, this is another thing that you have to think about with stitching. A lot of cowboy boot designs have points, And you have mirror images. Things need to meet on the side seam. They need to meet in the middle. And so when you have points, you want your points to point at each other and not like this if they're mirrored points. So the way I've achieved that here is these are contour lines. So as I stitch it, I know where to stop my point so that they will continue to point in the direction I want them to go. And there's a completed one. And I hope you can tell that all my points match. This was kind of a fun one. This guy played the Little Prince in a theater, and he wanted a pair of Little Prince boots. So this was the design I sent to him. It's another one-piece top because you can do so much. You've got so much shape with that. These are my pattern pieces that I'm going to use to get me through this design. And there we go. Here's the Little Prince. He was really fun to do. And you can't really tell it, but in this one, that back strap is a tree. It's a tree trunk. Because again, I don't like back straps. I like designs. Okay, one of the interesting things about cowboy boots is there aren't any gender distinctions in cowboy boots. You can have whatever you want. You can have whatever colors you want. Flowers and butterflies are traditional themes. They're not feminine themes. They're traditional themes. One of the reasons for that, we talked earlier about that H shape of the boot tops. When you have flowers, they can flow and fill up that entire space. Butterflies with wings fill in that space well. Sometimes eagles are used with the wings to fill in that space. But there's nothing considered feminine about cowboy boots. This is a pair of boots I made for a man. He said he wanted trilliums and dogwood flowers. And then I took it from there. And he was pleased.
How do you hold the heel together? You said you did layers of leather. So how do you hold them together?
When I put it on the way everything is held together is when I put it on the last. It's wrapped around together and pulled underneath and pegged into place and glued into place and stitched into place so nothing will move, and that's what holds it all together. These were kind of fun. This is a Thunderbird, and see that black border all around the bird? The way I did that is I just made the bird solid black. I put it in there, and then I carefully cut that black border so that it would be accurate. It's difficult to get an accurate straight line, and that's how I achieved it, because I wanted a solid black border all around that bird. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I name all of my boots after bluegrass and classic country songs because that's the music that I love. And these are called Ain't No California because I was feeling particularly curmudgeonly that day. I frequently am. And these are called, oh shoot, No Stranger to the Rain. Yeah, because he talks about thunder in that song, Keith Whitley. Sometimes I forget my song titles. I'm no stranger to the rain. That's what this one is. The popularity of leather really depends on who you are as a bootmaker and what you offer to your customers. If you don't have any ostrich in stock, or if you don't have any alligator in stock, people aren't going to order that. If you unroll an alligator in front of them, they're going to go, wow, that's cool, and order it. So what's popular is pretty much what I have in the shop. And another thing that influences that is color. Like ostrich, I can get in so many colors. And then other leathers I can only get in black and brown. So if you want a lavender foot, it's probably going to be ostrich.
Why is that? Does it take time?
I'm not involved in the tanning process. I don't know why some leathers are available in colors and others aren't, but it's probably just how many people do we think are going to buy this? And for some reason, I guess ostrich sells in a wide range of colors. What you have to remember about the bespoke business like me, we don't get to, nothing is designed for us. Nothing is made for us. We're getting whatever the factories want, we get around the edges. So no one's dyeing purple leather from me. Actually, I take that back. I import kangaroo from Italy and sell it, and so they are dyeing it for me. But without me, there wouldn't be kangaroo in colors because it's just not a big enough market. All right, this one, I had this vision. I wanted something that looked like stained glass. And again, it is so hard to convey light, shadow, or movement with leather. So what I did is I created an overlaid design and then I stitched. It's a purple top and I stitched with lavender over it and to try to get the feeling of light coming through stained glass. I don't know if I achieved it, but this is the closest you'll probably get. And these are called Mother Country Music. These are for a musician friend of mine. He's a songwriter, so these are called "Baby I'm Blue," which is one of his songs. And he's originally from Missouri, my home state, and he wanted dogwood flowers and bluebirds because bluebird is the Missouri bird. And these were so fun. I love the way they flow. And again, Jay's the one, this grumpy old alcoholic, he's the one that taught me how to make something that flows and is graceful. I remember him telling me that a cowboy boot design should look like a Coke bottle or a beautiful woman, and then he would make this hourglass shape. You want something really sensuous and lovely. This is probably one of my most popular designs because men tend to love this one. They get some color, but it's not an overwhelmingly feminine floral design. And I love doing it. This is one of Jay's designs, and it makes me think of him every time. And these are called My Elusive Dreams. Recently, I've started playing with shoes. These are cowboy boot shoes. These are shoes built on a cowboy boot last. They are super fun, and they fit and feel like a cowboy boot. I have a pair of them up front. They're kind of short boots, but they're basically shoes. These were made for a personal chef. He wanted not just vegetables on his shoes, but he wanted spring vegetables. Yeah, that was tough. This is a pair of boots I made for myself, covered with little flowers. These were tough. These are patterned like a shoe, not a cowboy boot. When I started making shoes are totally different than cowboy boots, and I have blundered my way through it, and I'm finally starting to get better, but shoes are tough. This is just an example. I'm obsessed with a band called the Louvin Brothers, a brother duo from the 1950s, and this just shows you how I've achieved more light and shadow. Their faces were flat until I put in the stitching. Eyes are particularly hard. I knew I had succeeded when I was stitching this, and I began to feel that their eyes were following me as I stitched. This one was fun. It's an overlaid art piece. And after I finished this lovely art piece, I just stitched gray lines across it in the hopes it would look like rain, and it does. I'm so proud of this piece. The owners are in the audience today. And so I was thinking one day, it's hard to convey light and shadow. You probably could not do a reflection, but what if you could? How would you do it? So the top part is overlay, and then I repeated the design upside down, but it is repeated entirely in stitching. And that's how I did a reflection.
What is this piece?
It's just an art piece. It's framed. And that is an example of my work. I would love to take questions.
Was that your design
Thank you. Yes, this is an original design. It was one of those things that just popped into my head and wouldn't leave me alone until I did it.
So it wasn't custom made for them?
No, it was my idea, and then they saw it and bought it, and I was like hanging on to it as it left the shop because I've never made anything like that before, and I love it. Yes. 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 Pigskin, yes. The question was if pigs is used in cowboy boots. Pigskin often is used in cowboy boots, but it's typically it's a heavy rough out like a suede, and it's used for the foot of work boots. So sometimes if you see a fuzzy boot, that might be pigskin. I don't use it, but some bootmakers do. Yes. Well, thank you for taking your guests to the state capitol and showing them my boots because I'm so proud of them. If anyone's not been to the Oklahoma State Capitol, they have a fantastic art collection. It is a gallery, and to be featured in there alongside those artists is a dream come true. The day that I presented the boots and then they gave us a tour of the Capitol and I walked around to see the other artists and it just made me cry to think that I was in there with them.
I think they just reopened that gallery last week, so it's been closed. It's been closed and it's just now reopened.
Yeah. It's a lovely art collection. Yes. No, my boots are on the first floor. You know, they ripped out the whole basement and redid it because it used to be just really dark and basementy, and now it's light and lovely, and they put all new art in it. Yes. Oh, this is another good question. Why are the pegs made of lemon wood? Okay, I may be tarred and feathered after this response, but truth is there aren't any lemon wood pegs. They have never been made out of lemon wood. They're made out of birch. And no one knows where the whole lemon wood peg rumor started because there is no truth to it. But as far as I can tell, sometime in the 80s, there was a bootmaker who decided to start calling them lemon wood pegs, and we don't know why. Was he referring to the color? Was he making something up as a joke? We don't know. But they were not and have never been made out of some mysterious wood that no one knows what it is called lemon wood. They're made out of birch.
What about the heel height? How do you have a pattern that shows different styles of heels or whatever?
In my shop, I give you a form that shows your heel choices and your toe style choices, and then the heel height that you choose is up to you and how it's shaped, if it's goes under or if it's straight. All of those things are up to you. That's part of the design process. Yes. Yeah. How many boots have wood pegs? It just depends. Many factories don't use wood pegs, or they use far fewer. That's really often the answer. Is a factory boot will have fewer wood pegs than mine. You saw that picture where I had like 200 pegs. And if you want to claim a traditional cowboy boot, then you're going to want to put some pegs in there, even if it's not as many. Do we have any other questions?
Have you been in Guthrie in the boot shop?
How long have I been in Guthrie? I moved to Guthrie when I got married in '89. I started with Jay in 1990, and I opened my own boot shop in '96. And I've had the building downtown where I am now. I bought that building in 2000. It had been a restaurant, and the roof leaked, and we gutted that place. We were down to the studs, and then I made it into a boot shop.
Did it used to be bakery?
The building that I'm in used to be, it was a Harvey House first.
If someone wanted to get a pair of boots made, what is the wait time?
The average wait time for a pair of cowboy boots depends largely on the bootmaker. My wait time is around 2 years. Some bootmakers are as little as 8 months, but there is a wait time every time. When you come in and place an order, that puts you on the calendar, and then they will get to your boot when they get to your order. Yes.
Was the machine that your mother taught you to sew on like electric, or was it a treadle?
The machine that my mother taught me to sew on was an electric machine. We weren't Amish. But yeah, it was an electric. Oh, I've never sewn on a treadle. I've always wanted to. Actually, my mother someone gave her a treadle just recently. We didn't have any thread in the machine, but I got to do the motion. And it was super fun. Yes.
I had a question
That that's an excellent question. When did it go from factory setting making cowboy boots to individuals? And it's interesting just the way you pose the question because that is what happened. Cowboy boots are traditionally a factory product, not a bespoke maker like myself. And when did it happen? I don't really know. I'm gonna guess 1930s. Well, actually, yeah, I do know that there was one in the 30s at least. And so I'm sure there were people doing it. They got tired of working in a factory and thought, I can do this and took off. But when Jay was 13 years old, he was born in 1920. When he was 13, he would hike into town to watch a bootmaker in his town make boots because he wanted to learn. And the old bootmaker also made violins. So when Jay came in, if he was working on boots, he would just put them down and start working on violins because he didn't want Jay to learn anything. So we know that in the 30s, there were several single boot shops.
Speaking of, to piggyback on his, you've got a gap in history that you're trying to fill, and somebody in this room might have access to one of those things. Can you tell people what it is you're looking for?
I'm trying to write a book about the history of cowboy boots, and there is a gap. So we know that the cowboys rode the trail in the 1870s and 80s, and we know the earliest that I can find leather inlay and overlay work is the higher catalogs from 1918. So what happened in there is what I'm trying to find out. I have not been able to find any primary sources where a bootmaker says, today I decided to put a purple butterfly on a cowboy boot, and this is why. Or a buyer who said, today I wanted yellow flowers on my boots, so I ordered them. I can't find anything like that. So if you have any access to diaries or letters, also old vintage catalogs, I'm always looking for those because since there is so little to none written history of the cowboy boot, then a lot of times the only way you can deduce what was happening is in the very old catalogs. I'm trying to find out what was happening from 1910 to 1915. It's just kind of a blank space. And anything you've got, I would love to see it or talk to you. Yes. How old are the machines that I use? Well, my first curve needle was from the 1920s, but I finally upgraded and I've got one from the 1940s now. My machine's from the 1940s, and then I have some newer machines too. Most of the time, you've got a range from 1940s to 1960s. We're bespoke cowboy boot makers. We use old equipment. We're not. Some of the smaller sewing machines we get new, but for the most part, the larger machines we have to buy used. Who repairs the machines? Us. Yeah, it's. I used to have an old guy that would come around and work on the machines, but he's gone now. And so if one of my machines goes out of time, I have to figure out how to time it. And it's scary. We are on the edge of extinction. That's just the grim facts. Yes.
Do you have any idea how many bespoke cowboy boot makers there are?
How many bespoke boot makers? That kind of depends on how you define it. There are makers who make a living making cowboy boots as their full-time job. There are people who do it as a hobby. If you take all of us together, what do you think, Morgan? 150 maybe? Yeah. And the ones that are doing it full-time as a living, maybe 50. We aren't a large market, but we're dedicated and passionate and obsessed. I am no longer at the young end. Younger people are getting into it, and that's really exciting to see. And I welcome everyone. A lot of times, people can't afford to enter this industry until they retire from something else. When you start out, you must have another form of income. You need a supportive spouse or an inheritance or something because you will not make it in the first 5 or 10 years. What you're doing is making mistakes and using leather, and you're not making money. And there's very little money after either. But it's really fun. But yeah, there are younger people coming into it, and that's good to see. But unless we hang on to the suppliers like the wood pegs, it's going to go away. Do we need to? Okay, one or two more questions? Yes.
Are there any road techs, colleges, universities that are teaching any boot making?
That's an excellent question. Are there any colleges or schools that teach it? OSU used to have a branch campus in Okmulgee where they taught it, but that closed down, and the answer right now is no. There are occasionally small bit makers like myself that teach classes, but there are no schools. And, they have to invest in a lot of equipment and machinery that they don't understand, and left to their own devices, they will buy exactly the wrong thing. And it's tough. And then you get students in there and you can't promise them that they're ever going to make a living doing this. It's just really fun. But of course, you can probably say that about a lot of college classes. So, yes.
Well, you're leading into my question, what's the legacy of your shop? Family,
The legacy of my shop,
yeah, the future.
the future of my, I would just like to, what I love to do is take young makers who have been making boots on their own for a while, and they figured it out and they're doing okay, but they've hit a wall. They just can't quite get as nice as they want. That's the stage I'd love to get them, and just help them over and encourage them and support them and make them better boot makers and better business people, and send them out to where now they're fully equipped to have a good business, or as good as it can be in cowboy boots. That's what I love. Do I have any students now? Well, right now, I happen to have a visitor from Idaho and a visitor from Colorado. And they have come in to spend a week with me and just use my shop and ask me questions. And then I have a young woman who moved here from New Zealand. And she's been with me for 5 years, and she's getting ready to move to Canada, and I'm going to miss her a lot. But she spent 5 years with me and is leaving me a really good bootmaker. So occasionally it does happen, yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, Lisa Sorrell.
So I have a portfolio up here. I have a pair of boots that I've made. I've got business cards. If you want to come up and chat, feel free.